Hedy also at that time starred in in 1933 starred in a musical by Fritz Keisler called Cece, which was a musical adaptation about the young life of Elizabeth of Austria, a national heroine, if you will. And that movie brought her to the attention of her first husband, who was munitions czar Fritz Mandl. Fritz Mandl had a very colorful life, the son of a man who actually founded these munition factories. Of course, after World War I, those munition factories were supposed to produce other usable items in Austria, but Fritz, when he took over in 1922, immediately started producing munitions again. Fritz himself was Jewish, however, he was considered an honorary Aryan, and he basically straddled both sides of the fences. And when fascist governments started to grow in Europe, both Mussolini and Hitler were supplied munitions and armament from Fritz Mandl's factories. He was the third richest man in Austria, and of course that was a big attraction to Hedy. She always had an affinity for wealth and money, and she was used to that. So she married him, and for several years she was a trophy wife. She gave up her career to be with him. And during those years she would sit at the table night after night, bedecked in jewels and absolutely breathtaking young woman, and listen to these very, very dull conversations of Mandl and his cronies talking about the buildup of armament and what was going to happen in Europe. This obviously, she soaked in a lot of the information that they said at these tables, at this table, at night after night. And there's a bit of controversy about what really caused her to escape Europe. Well, of course, obviously, she feared for her safety. At some point, the telling of her escape in 1937 to America on board the Normandy, where she had escaped her husband in the middle of the night, drugged the maid, and ran off, caught a train to Paris first and divorced Fritz Mandl, and then a boat from Calais over to London, where she met for the first time Louis B. Mayer, who said, "I'm going to make you a big star in Europe, let's go sail on the Normandy," and in 1937 that's what she did. It's not really all true. Fritz Mandl and Hedy Lamarr never met Hitler. However, they were friends and they did dine with Mussolini. There was a book out a couple of years ago called What Almost Happened to Hedy Lamarr. And it was a purported biography in a novelized form of her relationship with Adolf Hitler. She had never met Adolf Hitler. She would never have been introduced to him in 1933 or later, and Fritz never was introduced to him as well. However, during the 1930s, Fritz was also funneling a lot of his assets to South America. He saw what was happening. Adolf Hitler clearly wrote in his manifest Mein Kampf what his intentions were, especially what he intended to do with the Jews in Vienna. So there was true concern about Hedy's safety, and obviously at some point in 1937, well, their marriage being very, very strained at that time, Hedy was conducting various affairs with some of the most important leaders in Austria, including the Vice Chancellor of Austria. At some point, she did leave Fritz in the middle of the night without his knowledge. She did go to Paris. She found out before she even unpacked her clothes that he was following her, and she did indeed take a boat from the port of Calais over to London. And she did hear at that time, by luck, that Louis B. Mayer was in London at that time. However, they had met in 1934, much before this infamous first meeting that has become truth. They met at Max Reinhardt's home in Austria. And Reinhardt wanted to introduce the two, because Hedy always wanted to come to America. She couldn't speak English. And Louis B. Mayer basically told her, we could never make you a star in America for various reasons. Number one, you can't speak the language. And number two, I won't be as crude as Louis B. Mayer said it, but we don't let our actresses run naked through the woods on the screen. That's not exactly what he said, but it's in the book. He turned her down flat. And of course, I'm sure that Fritz Mendel knew he had been set up. And she wasn't allowed to pursue her dreams at that time. But in 1937, as luck would have it, when she did get to London, Louis B. Mayer was just finishing up his last great roundup of talent from Europe. Every year, Louis B. Mayer, around that time, would go to Europe and round up talent through the auspices of his own mistress, Adeline Schulberg, who was the wife of Paramount executive B.P. Schulberg. At any rate, Ad Schulberg always told Louis B. Mayer that it would probably behoove him financially and certainly morally to bring over these Jewish artists who were in obvious danger of not being on this earth too much longer. Some of the stars that Hedy had worked with in her early motion pictures in Europe, aside from Peter Lorre, one was Kurt Gerron. Kurt Gerron was a very, very, very famous, important film comedian in Germany and in Austria. In the late 20s, 1930s, he was the originator of the role, again, the name slips my mind, in the Threepenny Opera. And he was the man who introduced Mac the Knife in the Threepenny Opera. Tragedy about Kurt Gerron was he escaped Germany, but he didn't come to America, as many of the Jews in Europe, Jewish artists in Europe did not do. They went elsewhere in Europe, and eventually they were captured and sent to concentration camps. Kurt Gerron was promised, if he would direct this particular motion picture about how Hitler gave the Jews a lovely city to live in at the concentration camp of Theresienstadt. The camera crews were brought in, and Kurt Gerron directed this movie. If he would direct this, he and his wife would not be sent to an extermination camp. So the camera crews came in 1943, 1944, and they filmed the Jewish children eating for the first time in a long time. Everybody was smiling and on their best behavior, because there were guards behind the cameras. And Kurt Gerron directed this propaganda film, which the Red Cross wanted to rectify to the international community that what was going on in Germany wasn't as bad as they thought. As soon as the camera crew left, everybody was sent to extermination camps, including Kurt Gerron and his wife. The tragedy about that was, as his wife was being led into the gas chamber, they forced him to sing Mac the Knife one more time. So these tragedies, Hedy possibly didn't know about that at that time, about the final result of Kurt Gerron. But she knew what was happening. She was wise enough to know that her own safety was in jeopardy. So she made her escape, if you will, but her mother stayed behind. Indeed, when she met Louis B. Mayer, she found herself an agent, first of all, in London. She was there very briefly, less than a week or two. And she found an agent, and he took her to the Dorchester, I believe was where Louis B. Mayer was staying. And he introduced Hedy to Mayer, reintroduced Hedy to Mayer, and she had picked up a little bit of English, and in her fractured English, she said she was way too young when she made Ecstasy. She was forced to do the movie. That became the legend. Louis B. Mayer thought, well, we'll give you $50 a week. She stood up and she said, I am a star in Europe, and walked out. Later that afternoon, she and her agent sat at a restaurant over coffee, and she reconsidered. She thought, perhaps I better take him up on the offer. And by that later that day, she reconnected with Louis B. Mayer, and he said, if you can, I'll give you the contract, but you'll have to work, you'll have to pay your own way across the ocean. When Hedy escaped, she had some of her jewels with her, and by that time, most of them were gone. She had a designer gown in her bag, she had the clothes on her back, and about $80 American in her pocket. And she said, what am I going to do? Well, the agent called the French line, the owners of the Normandy, found out the ship was completely booked, and he struck up an idea. He thought, well, you can pose as the governess of this young violin protege, Misha Gubloff, who was finishing up a tour of Europe. You can be his governess and go across. So when she had to go back over to Calais, or to Le Havre, to board the ship, and when the Normandy took off, it threw a propeller. So they had to go back to Calais, or to Le Havre, to Le Havre. And during that 1 or 2 day period where the ship was in repair, and of course the passengers were allowed to stay on board, Hedy enchanted everyone on board, people on board included David Niven. Hedy was so breathtakingly beautiful, and Louis B. Mayer finally acquiesced, and he said, we will give you $550 a week if you will sign with me. Now go up to E-Deck and buy some decent clothes. And he gave her money, and there were all sorts of couturiers on E-Deck where she bought fashion. Of course, she loved that, and also a good set of luggage. When the ship landed in New York, and I was very specific with the editors of this book, I had 2 pictures. A picture of Hedy when the reporters came on board the Normandy the last week of September 1937, and they took pictures of her, and she was very Euro glamour, very heavy makeup, big, huge corsage, and that picture is in the book. But when she got on the train, she spent a couple of days in New York. When she got on the train to disembark in Pasadena, I believe is where she disembarked, there was a completely different woman there. With her across the United States was an MGM representative that said, you know, we have to work on your look. First of all, we have to work on your English. We have to work on your look, and we have to work on your fashion. So there is another picture right beside that of her stepping off the train, and it's the Hedy Lamarr that we knew when she first started appearing in motion pictures. Hedy was, somebody asked the other night, did she choose the name Lamarr or did Louis B. Mayer? Louis B. Mayer always said, and the legend became the fact, the legend was that Louis B. Mayer named her after an actress who was called the girl who was too beautiful, Barbara Lamarr, who died tragically in 1926. That's not really true. Hedy, until the day she died, according to family and associates of hers, and what I found that she had written, always said, I looked out upon the sea, and Louis B. Mayer told me I had to disassociate myself, number 1, with being Jewish, number 2, with being married to a munitions czar, number 3, with having appeared nude in ecstasy. I had to have a new name. And she looked upon the sea, La Mer, and she came up with Lamarr. Whatever. Her name was changed to Hedy Lamarr. And when she was finally given the grand tour of Metro, by a press agent, she was taken to the Hotel Montmartre, and that night she signed her name for the first time as Hedy Lamarr, and she misspelled it. The name was given to her, but nobody told her how to spell it, and she spelled it Lamar. Fortunately, that record still exists, that sign-in booklet, and so that was documentation.